kind of what you've done, your experiences. Yeah, like
Yeah. Well, I started my career as a dietitian and I'm still a dietitian. I consider myself that first and foremost. Very conventionally trained. I have, a couple degrees, basically kind of metabolic physiology track. So I'm a metabolism guru, I guess, at heart, and started my kind of career in sport performance. And then I fell into lab diagnostics early, and it's been great. And I love labs. And, there's different specimens for labs, blood, urine, stool, and it's all great. And you can get fantastic information. And I just quickly realized that you can't really do precision coaching, nutrition therapy, counseling, whatever you want to call it, basically helping people get better. You can't do that without labs. And so, I've been in the lab industry for like 15 years, and it's been a lot of fun. And I've worked for various companies in the field. Probably about 10 years ago, I sort of niched down in the gut.
Mhm.
And that's a really exciting realm. I mean, it was a big deal 10 years ago. And I think, that was sort of the embark of this whole field. Perlmutter was writing books about it, and everyone was starting to get excited about it. And we were just skimming the surface about a decade ago.
Yeah.
And now we've really broadened our understanding. I mean, if you look at the inflection point of the PubMed curve of research articles of the gut and health, it's, right around now, right? So it's an exciting area, and we know that the gut is really the gateway of a lot of avenues of health in terms of the gut-brain connection, the gut-skin connection, the gut metabolism connection. You can put whatever sort of spin you want on it, but basically if your gut's not working right, you're not working right. And that's what I really have focused on. And it's exciting to work with, and kind of where I consider my expertise these days.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Let's just jump right into it.
Okay.
Can you explain the gut microbiome?
Yeah. So the gut microbiome, that's a term that gets thrown around quite a lot,
does.
right? So it's an ecosystem. So we have, we are more bacteria than we are human from a DNA level. And that's kind of bizarre to think about. But within us, there lives this entire ecosystem of microorganisms, and they control an awful lot. And so that's what the microbiome is. It's this ecosystem, and it's made up of bacteria, fungi, archaea, and then, where we get into trouble with it is noxious organisms that are acquired and or depletion of our commensal organisms. And, the reality is we live in a society that sort of fosters that depletion. You think about things like antibiotics, but you also think about things like toxins, pesticide exposure on our food, stress, lack of sleep, too much screen time, blue light, environmental pollution, you name it, the list goes on.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of ailments that set us up for perturbances in what's considered a healthy microbiome. The food we eat too, of course. So we're talking about an ecosystem, but it's an ecosystem that drives homeostasis. And when it's not healthy, your body's not at homeostasis. And so, we're working to always restore that balance. And it's not just a one size fits all approach. It's not just take a probiotic and you're good. It's not just eat more fiber and you're good. There's a lot more to it than that. And there's a lot of individual variation and individual responses to things and individual sensitivities to things. And that's where it gets a little more complicated, but a little bit more fun to work with.
Sure. And it seems like due to all those variants that are against us on a regular basis, it would be a consistent thing that you're constantly working on.
Yeah.
Like there's never a time to where it's like you've cured the gut, you're going to be completely balanced, you'll never have to test, or you'll never have to do any sort of revamp in your nutrition, in your supplement protocols, anything like that ever again. It's like a constant thing that's going to change, and you'll have to consistently keep an eye on it?
Yeah, I think we're getting better at that. I think the next generation is going to know a lot more, and there's a lot you can do in younger years to set yourself up for what's called gut resilience. But we didn't know that when we were kids, right? And but you're right, and then it's like, we both have young kids. They come home with strep throat. Really, the only thing to do with that is take a hit of amoxicillin.
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, crap.
Yeah.
And, so there's so many ailments that we can talk about, and we're constantly bombarded with them. So yeah, it is a constant, I'm not going to say it's a constant battle, but it's a constant moving target.
Sure. And
it's something that, it's kind of like exercise. You can't just work out for 6 months and expect to maintain physique for the rest of your life, So it is constant body maintenance. We can call it that. It's a goal to work on, and it's a target of intervention.
Sure. And you talk about gut resilience. Is that something that you can only attain at a young age? Or is that something like you and I can attain now?
No, I think you and I can attain it now. Definitely. I don't want to say that it's, and it's more than just genetic predisposition, but there are good things we can do early in life with diet and just preventing overuse of antibiotics and stress and sleep and all of the things that we think about. But it does sort of set the stage early in life.
Gotcha.
And we all know that, but yeah, we're learning more and more about that.
Gotcha. So it's like the least amount of damage that you can do up front is obviously going to make your gut more resilient as you move forward.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. And you talk about probiotics.
Yeah.
What are your feelings on probiotics as a whole? Because that's become now probably the number one supplement that anyone talks about.
Oh, yeah. And it's put a number on it, something $1 billion industry. I don't even really know.
And it's going to cure everything.
Yeah, and it's really not. I think they have their place. They absolutely have their place. First of all, there's different kinds of probiotics and different intentions of probiotic use. And whoever is recommending probiotics needs to be knowledgeable about that. And I feel like that's not always the case. Okay. And there's a lot of so many products in the industry, both direct to consumer and, practitioner related products. I think they have their place. Absolutely. Especially in gut recovery. All right. So I feel like I'm talking about antibiotics too much, but also that's a big ailment.
It's a harsh one.
So, post antibiotic use or intermittently with antibiotic use, again, different targeted therapies for different problems out there. One of the docs that I follow, she uses the analogy that probiotics are like air conditioning, right? They work while we're using them, but they're not really intentionally designed to reseed the gut. So what happens when you turn the air conditioning off on a hot day? The house gets hot pretty quickly, right? So first of all, they're not use this product for X amount of days and you're good to go. Even if you are going to use them as a maintenance, which is effective. That's an effective strategy. They can get expensive. So that's a barrier for people. But no, I use probiotics, but I actually don't use them as often as I use other strategies. And I have seen them do harm to people. And I have seen people have adverse reactions. If you have a lot of overgrowth in the gut, certainly like the bad kind of overgrowth, inflammatory overgrowth, or even just overgrowth in general, or if you have slow transit, poor motility, you're almost like adding fuel to the fire if you're just dumping extra organisms in a gut that's already dysregulated and inflamed and going haywire anyway. So yeah, different types of probiotics for different utility, and you need to kind of know what you're talking about if you're going to be recommending them. And then there's like strain specificity, which is kind of the next era. And that's exciting. Yeah. And I think there's a lot more to learn about that as well. I think we're at the beginning of that stage, but I think that's where the future is probably. Yeah. But yeah, so useful, but you need to be targeted with what you're doing.
Sure. Okay. Going more into the nutrition and dietary side.
Yeah.
I guess what are the top dietary mistakes people are making now that are potentially hurting their gut or hurting their health in general? I guess we can use an umbrella statement.
Yeah. And I actually want to backtrack that because when we talked about probiotics, so probiotics have their place. And we just said, strain specificity is probably the next era of all of this. And probiotics are not going to go away. And I don't think they should. But we are entering the era of more so postbiotics and the understanding of postbiotics. And postbiotics are actually what our gut microbiome is producing. So your gut byproducts of metabolism, moving into this field of metabolomics. And that's really where it's at, because it's not even really about, to some degree it is about the health of the ecosystem, certainly, but what are these organisms doing for us? What are they producing? Are they putting out anti-inflammatory compounds or pro-inflammatory compounds? And so this era of postbiotics is exciting. And that actually, there's limited supplement options for postbiotics, but I'm actually starting to use those more and more and more in protocols. And there's evidence, even with antibiotic use, that maybe using postbiotics simultaneously is protective to colonocytes and things like that. So enter the conversation about diet. You've got to feed the gut. We feed ourselves, certainly, in terms of like your macronutrients and your minerals and things like that, but micronutrients as well. But you've got to feed these gut bugs. And they ferment, right? Most of them in the lower bowel are anaerobic. So they work through fermentation, and some bugs ferment carbohydrate, starches, fibers. Other gut bugs ferment protein, and some have more flexibility than others. So when we talk about mistakes in the diet, it's a hard thing to talk about. And diet precision is a hard thing to talk about. And there's a lot of things are double-edged swords, right? Yeah. Like protein, okay? Yeah. Like, you're a fitness guy, like protein is critical. And we're also in this era of like this awakening to accelerated loss of muscle mass with aging. And we need to protect that. And protein's really the way we do that. And so I'm very pro protein, but it's got to be balanced. Okay. It's got to be balanced with equal amount of fermentable carbohydrate. So I do see people going too high in proteins often, just in terms of like total macros. Lack of fiber in the diet is another thing. That's a big concept though, because so many people are sensitive to fibers. And that's another thing, kind of like we talked about probiotics. There's different types of fibers. So it's more than just like your soluble, insoluble conversation, which is what I was taught in school, right?
That's all I know about,
right?
To be honest.
Okay, yeah. So, so there's different types, and some are more aggravating to the gut than others. And again, with certain dysbiosis patterns in the gut, you're going to be more sensitive to fiber. So fiber is critical. And I do work with people to kind of count grams, whether it be fiber, whether it be protein, whether it be carbs. I think there is certain utility in that for the right people who like numbers and want to get granular with it. But again, you have to be kind of knowledgeable about different elements and strategize that. And then there's also kind of this intuition of eating, which I think a lot of us have missed. So nutrition counseling is a very difficult thing. Other errors people make, just processed foods, too much sugar, salt, and fat, I guess, is a good way of saying it. But eating things that come from a box or a bag that are hyper-processed, overly sterile. Pesticides are a huge problem. And we just treat our food supply with them. And so it takes a lot of intention to avoid that. It's hard and it's expensive and it's a challenge for people. And so I'm often helping people prioritize, like, where you're going to where you're going to get the biggest bang for the buck in terms of making good choices, because you can't be perfect. And with kids, I mean, come on, like that's a whole different avenue of difficulty too, is trying to teach kids to eat intuitively and not train them to have this to gravitate towards hyper palatable foods. That's a huge challenge too, is so many, if you think about like a Dorito, I mean, it tastes good, right? And a lot of us are very conditioned to want that. And so you have that compared to a raspberry, it's like, what's your choice? So training the brain away from that. I also really don't reliance on artificial sweeteners. And that's another area where they're not all created equal and there's different types. And that's all fine, well, and good. But especially for people that have sugar cravings and are trying to watch simple carbohydrate intakes and sugar intakes, they train the brain. They train the brain to want sugar. Like there's this, what's called the cephalic phase of an insulin response to food. And those artificial sweeteners are not making that any better for people. Right. And then there's also data looking at things like aspartame and having a negative impact on the gut microbiome. So there's like direct and indirect consequences. Sure. And then I guess just sugar in general. It's interesting in talking to people about food, because sugar is a carbohydrate. It falls into that macronutrient category, but people don't always think of it that way. And, you know, I'm sure you and the listeners have heard of the low FODMAP diet, which people go on, those people that are sensitive to fiber types. It's a diet that gets thrown around. I've worked with so many people who have been handed a low FODMAP diet handout by their doctor, not explained about it, just here, try this. Mm-hmm. Really hard diet to follow. And basically it eliminates the rapidly fermentable carbohydrates of some of those simple fibers that can be aggravating. You want to know what is the most aggravating simple carbohydrate there is? Sugar. And that is never on that list. And it never falls in that bucket of counsel around. So it's like people are stressed out because they can only eat half an avocado instead of one avocado. And then there's this whole bucket of sugar consumption that's kind of ignored a lot of times. So that's one of my, I don't know, I can get on a soapbox about that because that's a pain point for me. But just looking at how much added sugar is in everything is a huge, just eye-awakening strategy that I try to talk to people about. Food labels leave a lot to be desired. But if you are eating foods that come with a label, meaning they come in a box or a bag or a package, you got to be looking at them because they're all we have, really, unless you're, scanning barcodes and things like that. That's another option. But I mean, take a look at that added sugar on the food label. So I guess those are the big ones. I feel like I kind of answered that question.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. So when it comes to like fad diets that are essentially limiting or decreasing versatility of food, that's probably not ideal to go like completely carnivore, or paleo does a little bit better job than the carnivore diet. Like those diets that are eliminating an entire macronutrient category.
Yeah, they're not my favorite. I'm not going to say there isn't a place for them. The Mediterranean diet wins the game all day, every day. All day, every day. If you look at any large cohort nutrition study, which nutrition studies are really, really, really hard to do. So the good ones that are out there with large volume sample sets, you got to give them credit and you got to kind of take them for what they're worth. And every single study out there, the Mediterranean diet wins the game, which is what, it's the base of that pyramid is plant-based foods, some of the more discretionary stuff in moderation, healthy fats, high omega-3. There's a lot of seafood in those diets, abundant amounts of olive oil, most people know what the Mediterranean diet looks like, but, so that's a good principle to follow. The more extremes of that, like carnivore, I have seen them work well for people. They're usually people that are very black and white thinkers. that, they don't want to exist in these shades of gray. They can be very successful for weight loss. You take carbs out of your diet, you're going to help your insulin resistance. That is a very known fact, because carbs are what's going to drive your insulin response. Protein can do it too, to a certain degree. And that's what people need to be careful with carnivore diets or keto diets. They're not exactly the same thing. They can be. There's kind of a Venn diagram there. But again, like, a keto diet largely should be very, very, very high in fat content. Protein's part of it, yes, but we really don't want protein to be more than like 30% of total calories. Otherwise, you start stressing your kidneys and the microbiome can start producing inflammatory compounds. And so that's something I see people doing wrong a lot, is just basically I'm eating a strict protein diet.
Right.
And I don't know. I mean, there's not long-term studies. I mean, to me, it's like if you are completely devoid of fiber, your colon's not going to be happy unless you're supplementing. Yeah, especially not long-term. And then, I mean, I suppose you could come in with supplements to support that, like butyrate, which is a postbiotic. I mean, you don't really get that unless your gut is fermenting fibers. And whenever I've done ketogenic counseling, I train people to do net carbs so you can include fibers. But a lot of people don't do it that way. And so it's an area that's misunderstood. There's an area that there's a lot of different opinions about. There's a lot of different definitions of what you're following. I don't find them to be effective long-term from a social standpoint and things like that. And I do feel that people that follow those types of philosophies become reliant on supplemental food, your bars and things like that. And a lot of people do artificial sugars on that diet. I don't mean to generalize, but that is just something I've observed and seen over time. But I have also seen people, lose dramatic amounts of weight, which is obviously net beneficial for everybody. So yeah, it's there's no one size fits all approach, and it's kind of up to the person to decide what's going to work for them a lot of times. Because if it's not sustainable, it doesn't work, period, end of sentence. Right. And I don't like the yo-yo effect. I've seen people blow up their lipids. I started in the first lab I worked with was a lipid lab. We did advanced lipid assessment, and I have seen people really, really blow up their lipid profile, kind of dancing in and out of ketosis. And so you end up just eating high fat most of the time, some of the time, but then you cheat. And so you're kicking yourself out of ketosis, and then your body's like, what is this insulin spike? Sure. And it can do bad things. Right. Yeah.
And it takes a while to get into ketosis. So it's like to essentially go backwards and then try and get back into ketosis. I'm sure that does damage to your body as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it can. And it can confuse the brain and everything else.
Yeah. Okay. I had a thought that was within that, and I cannot think of what it was.
I was gonna actually talk about time restricted eating, or this whole phase of intermittent fasting, which are not the same thing.
Okay.
And I think if I were to educate someone around this topic, I would encourage them to use and think about the concept of time restricted eating more than intermittent fasting. I don't really recommend intermittent fasting, particularly for women, hormonally, stress responsively, muscle mass stability, like these extremes of fasting and week-long water fasts. Like, I don't really get down with that. That's not something I would ever really set anyone up for. But time restricted eating, which the definition of that is simply you're eating in a specified window, and it's usually a shortened window. So I'm going to get all my calories within 8 hours or 10 hours. And then I'm going to give my body and my gut a rest the rest of that time in a 24-hour sequence. I do recommend that. And I do counsel around that, and I do follow that myself. There is actually quite a substantial body of literature with the gut microbiome and some of our more productive keystone species actually increasing in the fasted state. There's also the concept that our gut needs rest, right? Like we were not designed to intake all the time. I mean, and also people should be sleeping, right? Like that too.
Yeah.
But
24 hours of eating does not make a lot of sense.
Right. 24 hours of eating does not make a lot of sense. When I was in I'm an RD. I was classically trained. I went through a very rigorous clinical internship program at a very well-acclaimed hospital in the country. It was a great experience. One of the things that I had this aha moment with in that internship was when people undergo anesthesia, the gut is the last thing to wake up after anesthesia. That's why they like hold you in the hospital until you've cleared your gut before they let you go home, just to make sure everything's okay and you don't end up with like a blockage or something like that.
Right.
So the gut is sluggish to wake up, right? So something I talk to people about, and this is where there's a lot of different opinions, because it's like you've got one body of evidence telling you like you need to be getting 20 grams of protein within an hour of waking. And then you've got another body of evidence saying, maybe we need to give our gut time to wake up in the morning and let those catecholamines sort of rev up the gut. It's different for everybody. And again, you've kind of got to figure out what works for you. But especially in terms of gut motility, I've had really good success personally and in working with people working around that time restricted eating. So you don't have to overcomplicate it. One of the things I just tell people is think about this, right? Think about it. How much time passes between the last thing you put in your mouth? I'm not talking about water, but I am talking about food and caloric beverage, even, alcohol as well. But how much time passes between the last thing you put in your mouth at night and the first thing in the morning? Is that 6 hours? Is that 8 hours? Is that 12 hours? I mean, I don't know. Figure it out. What are you currently doing? And can we extend that? If you're at 8 hours, I think that's too short, in my opinion. You should be sleeping during that time. Can you push that to 10? If you're at 10, can you push that to 12? It's some things to play with. It's a strategy to play with.
Sure.
And I think people can take it too far.
Yeah.
I have been known to take it too far myself, just forgetting, and going about your day. But I do think that helps with appetite regulation. I do think it helps with motility. And there's a large body of evidence to show that it helps to support a healthy microbiome, helps support things like metabolic endotoxemia, which we haven't talked about yet. But the fact of the matter is that eating is actually stressful to the body. It's a very intense process, and it can do damage. Even if you're eating the right things, it's associated with increases in inflammatory cytokines and things like that. So you don't need to be eating all day every day. I also don't need you doing a week-long water fast. But yeah, thinking about that eating timing is important. And then in this whole era of GLP-1s, that's something those medications are actually doing for us, is helping with that appetite regulation so that people are falling into that pattern a little bit more naturally.
Sure.
And it's helping. It's helping from a weight loss perspective, at least, although you can argue loss of muscle mass with that too. But And
the people not eating at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Unintentionally doing a 96-hour fast is not ideal. On that though, because fasting is huge right now. So a 72, 96-hour fast, which is what they say is optimal for cognitive, anti-inflammatory. Potentially, people say it helps the gut. What are the downsides to doing that? Why don't you advocate?
Hormonal dysregulation, cortisol levels. and this isn't a body of literature that I know like the back of my hands. I don't know. I mean, it would be interesting to do a study looking at cortisol, like salivary cortisol at multiple time points during that 96 hours or 72 hours. I know for women, especially, you know, in that change of life era, premenopausal era, I think it would probably do wild things to cortisol. Loss of muscle mass.
Yep.
So, I mean, there is no probably atopy. Like there is no building muscle mass if you're going about a 96-hour fast.
Yeah.
I shouldn't think. Those are probably the big ones. And that's obviously going to affect, I mean, your cortisol is going to affect your mood and things like that. Obviously dehydration, but I don't think those fasts really include like water.
No, anyone that says
fasting.
that they don't drink water for 96 hours is ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what's top of mind to me. Cortisol imbalances, neurotransmitter imbalances, and then loss of muscle mass is probably what's coming to mind.
Okay. From a gut standpoint.
And thyroid dysregulation.
Yeah. Sure. I can see that.
Yeah.
Okay. From a gut standpoint, though, it could potentially help.
Be a benefit.
So if the gut is like the number one issue in that individual and it's like, my gut, we just need to reset it, revamp something, get it back to baseline.
Calm it down in terms of, I mean, I think it would depend on what's going on. I think if somebody just has wild overgrowth and dysbiosis, it's like, let's stop feeding this. Yeah. But that can only take you so far as well, because if you don't use the gut, you lose the gut. I mean, this is a dietetics concept too. Like if you think of people that need to go on nutrition support, you're always going to do that. If the gut is functioning, you're always going to do that through the gut versus something like an intravenous nutrition support. Sure. If that's an option. Otherwise, you can have gut atrophy and, so, I mean, I think it's all about checks and balances. Yeah. But from a cognitive perspective, I mean, you're gonna kick yourself into ketosis, and I think that's where probably people feel the benefit from is utilizing that different brain substrate, and it can provoke mental clarity and who knows what else. With
I've heard that. I've never been able to do a fast that long.
I've never really tried, to be honest. It's not really something that maybe unintentionally I've taken it too far, but it's not something that I really am passionate about or really think intuitively it's a great idea. Yeah. And I'm sure, with all of this, like you get 5 different people in a room, you're going to get 5 different opinions on this. And that's what makes it so challenging. Yeah. And frustrating to a certain extent. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of research and a lot of biases on all sides. Going back on the GLP-1s. You're a fan, obviously, to an extent, of the GLP-1s. Is that right?
Well, I don't prescribe, so it's not something that people are coming to me for advice around. I say that, and then a lot of people are like, what is your professional opinion as a dietitian?
Yeah. Because I feel like dietitians are on either ends of the spectrum. I've talked to dietitians that are like, absolutely not. They're terrible for you. You can cure things. You can lose weight. You can do all of these things if you take a, dietary approach to it and you do it the correct way, which I don't disagree with necessarily. But at the same time, then you have the other people that are like, no, I think it's 100%, this is beneficial. This is what's, going on that is physiologically, it makes sense as to why it's working if you use it the correct way. And that's my standpoint on it, is as long as it's used correctly.
Yeah. And it's, what are your goals? What are your goals?
Yeah.
I mean,
and where are you at now?
I mean, because they are discovered by accident, but like hugely beneficial for people in terms of weight loss, yes, which is what everyone thinks about, but metabolic improvements, which is actually more important. Yep. So can you improve people's metabolic profiles, inflammatory profiles, obviously insulin resistance, diabetes, yes, you can do that. And if it's an assist for people that has not previously been available to us, that's a win.
Mm-hmm.
They work on gut motility, and they work on appetite regulation. I mean, it's pretty straightforward,
Mm-hmm.
honestly. I also think, I mean, there's interesting data coming out about using them as addiction potential assists for food, which is a huge addiction for people, but also even, other substances.
Alcohol is definitely one of them.
Yeah.
We've had patients that have literally stopped drinking.
Yes. And I have seen people do that unintentionally.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's like the desire isn't there.
Yep.
And that's
Exactly.
a double-edged sword too, because it can put people in more of an antisocial place, and they find themselves a little bit more apathetic towards things they used to enjoy. I mean, I've seen all of it, right? So I think I could say I'm glad these drugs are around and available to certain people. I mean, I've lost people in my life that I've had the thought like, oh my gosh, if these drugs were available at the time, like, this would have been a life changer for this person.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, 15 years ago, in terms of obesity medicine, really the only other sort of as effective alternative for people was like bariatric surgeries, which, still may have their place, but I feel like this may be a better option.
Mm-hmm.
That said, we don't have the long-term data.
We don't.
And, who knows? And then, so the downsides, would be you're consuming less, loss of muscle mass, which is inherently coming. So, most people are set up on these drugs for life, which is scary too. Cause like, what if there's supply issues or something, like what if you don't have access to this? And Big Pharma is like, I don't know, like lifelong prescriptions are scary to me. So where was I going with that? So, people are put on these drugs for life, and you're going to lose such and such body mass, but that is definitely inherently going to come with loss of muscle mass. Mm-hmm. So what if you ever come off the medication? There's going to be rebound weight gain. There is going to be. And we see that with bariatric surgery. We see that with calorie restricted diets. I mean, it's a proven fact. So there's got to be lifestyle intervention. There's got to be exercise, and there's got to be kind of precision nutrition prescription, and you've got to prioritize proteins. But that said, you got to balance protein with plants as well, in my opinion. I think the cool thing we can talk about as it relates to the gut is that GLP-1 can be regulated by the gut microbiome and the gut microbiome metabolites. And that has exploded recently. And there are certain precision probiotics that claim to target GLP-1 and can have appetite restrictive effects and weight loss effects. And, I think claims are, always an interesting thing, but some of these products out there, it's like they're claiming to be as effective as the medications, and they're not. Yeah. But can they be used adjunctively? Can they be used as a first step? Can they be used as a maintenance strategy? I mean, I think there's a lot of potential there, but that's what no one's really talking about. The drugs often come with side effects too. And that's also something that, working in gut health and testing for gut health, we can offer a lot of support in terms of those side effects. Yeah. Even digestive enzymes. I mean, that's actually, I have seen that happen with the agents just lowering pancreatic output of enzymes. And then, you come in there with enzyme support, which is, you're kind of
in conjunction with the GLP-1s themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So those are things you can do, certainly. Yeah. You get that info through testing, right? So it's a huge topic. It's a huge topic. But your gut regulates GLP-1. And that's something that, if anyone listening, if that's like the one thing you take away from this, please, put that in your pocket, because that's how we do it. And it's not just the microbiome, but it's the microbiome metabolites, and even things like bile acids. And again, like your short chain fatty acids that are the postbiotics that we're talking about, more so than just the bugs themselves.
Right. And from an insulin resistance standpoint, because that seems to be one of the biggest things, as obesity has become a problem, is insulin resistance is obviously leading cause or an output of that, which is then causing people to become more and more obese or more unhealthy.
It's a snowball. It's a snowball.
And that's what it seems.
It's a snowball disorder. That's how I always educated patients around it when I was working in diabetes and insulin resistance. Yeah.
And this seems to get you out of that. But I guess the question is that we get a lot is, okay, if I can get out of that, I can lose the weight, I can become less insulin resistant. Is there a way to essentially wean off those drugs and change the lifestyle to then become, I guess, back to baseline where you're not insulin resistant moving forward without the use of the GLP-1s? Because it's very hard to naturally get out of insulin resistance.
Yes, but it's not easy, but you can do it.
Oh,
you
100%.
can do it. Absolutely. So can you reverse insulin resistance?
Yes.
1,000%. Do GLP-1s make that easier? 1,000. Well, yes. Can you do it without the drugs? I don't know. Have you seen it yet? I mean, the pharma's not going to tell you that, right?
No,
they're going to set you up for lifelong treatment on this. I think theoretically it's possible.
Yeah.
And it's dosing too. I mean, can you taper down your dose and use less of it?
Sure.
That to me seems very realistic. PPIs, we haven't talked about that either, but we can. I mean, that's the other whole neck of the woods. But with PPIs, a lot of people I work with are trying to get off PPIs, and just the dosing and tapering dosing is largely effective for people. So I could see there being kind of a taper down of dose.
Yeah.
I think it's going to rigorously involve resistance training, being very targeted with your macros and your proteins, and also like what's going on with your brain chemistry, because do you have the same, what happens to your appetite when you come off of those drugs, and what happens to your, we were always trained not to use the word willpower. And I never really got that, because I'm like, well, if it's not willpower, what is it?
Yeah.
What is it? And so, I mean, it's brain signaling is what it is. It's neurochemistry is what it is. But why do some people have that and other people don't?
Sure.
And these drugs work on that neurochemistry. So can you reset your brain? Maybe. That's
a great question.
Yeah.
And that's something we don't know, I guess. I mean, based on patients that we've had that have tapered off of it, they do put the weight back on. And it typically is that it comes back they say it's even worse. Like the need for food, or that need for whatever they were craving prior is worse. I don't know if that's true, or if it's just they've eliminated that for so long, or it's been hidden.
Yeah.
But,
so I think that's the question and the answer.
It could be potentially more psychological than it is physiological. That's interesting.
Yeah, and that's where the efficacy in like addiction work too is very interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, we've talked to a number of people about that, bringing that into what we do. As, okay, well, you're going to get on GLP-1s, then we're going to have this whole other side, more counseling and therapy. That's related to why did you get there in the first place? What caused that? We got to treat that first and foremost before we taper you off these drugs, and then, get you back out into whatever you were essentially doing before. We don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you probably have more of a personal touch on this than I do, just because I'm not seeing it every day in my work. But yeah, it's a really interesting topic. It's like the hottest topic there is right now.
Yes,
so,
it is. Yes, it is.
But yeah, I mean, we see that even, rewind 15 years and we saw the same outcomes with hypocaloric eating and lap bands,
True.
It's like, and then you have less of an assist brain rewiring. But you do need to retrain the brain. And that's why, going back to our conversation about sugar being inflammatory and, not using artificial sweeteners and things like that, because they don't, like, that's counterproductive to retraining the brain, at least in terms of like sugar cravings and sugar sensitivities. There's more to it than that, of course.
Yeah.
But and what's it doing to your stress? What's it doing to your sleep? What's it doing to your quality of life and your happiness and your social connections? I do think that's important. And there's a balance to that too.
Yes, there definitely is.
So
there definitely is. We went through a lot of
questions. We've talked a lot, but there's always more to talk about.
PPIs, let's talk about that.
We can talk about PPIs.
Yeah. What are PPIs, first of all?
PPIs are proton pump inhibitors. So they are a medication that essentially stops or slows down or reduces the amount of stomach acid that we produce naturally. They are, I'm going to say this, but I want to say they're the bane of my existence. Like, they are given out for every single ailment. You can get them over the counter. I mean, you can take these things like candy. If you look at the literature on them, they haven't really been studied long-term after 2 weeks. And if you read the label on them, they are not indicated for more than 2 weeks of use. And people get put on them and never get taken off. Sometimes you use them as part of a medication regimen. There are pharmaceuticals like antibiotic treatments for something like H. pylori. Like, there are pharmaceuticals that work better at a different pH, and then you use PPIs to make the medications more effective. That I get. I mean, okay, but then that's supposed to be short-term use. But basically, I mean, you go to a doctor with any sort of digestion ailment, and that's what they reach for, is a PPI. In my line of work, I spend most of my days talking about the ill effects of low stomach acid. Even if you're not taking one of these things, stress can modulate your stomach acid for the worst. Poor circadian rhythms, dysbiosis in the gut. There are organisms in the gut that can neutralize stomach acid if they're overgrown. H. pylori is one of them. So I spend a lot of my days picking up on patterns of low stomach acid and working to improve people's stomach acid. And here we are as a society giving out prescriptions that were actually not even giving out pills like candy to reduce people's stomach acid. And stomach acid is really important. It is one of our body's defenses against foreign invaders. So think pathogens, think, anything that we come in contact to, our stomach acid is designed to kill it. And if you have less than optimal stomach acid, that's a major defense. It's also a trigger for pancreatic output of enzymes. So we were just talking about digestive enzymes with the GLP-1s.
Yeah.
It'd be really interesting to see. I do think that there's evidence suggesting that GLP-1s are also effectively potentially lowering stomach acid as well, reducing that output of enzymes. So so PPIs are not my favorite thing. And people go on them and they can't come off of them. And it creates this vicious cycle. I mean, you need your stomach acid to digest protein to get your amino acids that then turn into neurotransmitters that then turn into muscle mass. So it's a big deal. And there's a lot we can do with the gut to correct dysbiosis that may be causing these symptoms other than, the problem is often not your body overproducing acid.
Yeah.
But that's what conventional medicine tells us and how they treat it. And I guess intuitively it makes sense. So that's why we've all kind of followed along with this.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, it's other issues causing the problem.
Usually
And
is.
putting someone on a PPI is only going to really make things worse most of the time. So yeah, that's another thing that can really wreck a microbiome is long-term PPI use. And I don't want to tell someone they're doing, making a mistake by following a doctor's recommendation or something like that. But yeah, they're a big problem and they should not be overused. And that's another thing where dose is a big deal. Like, why are people, it's kind of like statins too. Like, why are we starting people on 80 milligrams of omeprazole?
Yeah.
Why are we starting people on 80 milligrams of Crestor? Like, why can't we start at a more modest dose, see if it's effective, and then kind of go from there? So yeah, it's something I talk about a lot.
Yeah.
But usually in the negative.
Yeah, no, it seems like you have a strong feeling about that, like I do with SSRIs. It's like, yeah, we just give it to everyone that has a minor issue. It's like, oh, well, this should help. Take this antidepressant. It's like,
right.
That's not even what the cause is. Like,
right.
That's not the problem.
Right. You're not depressed because of a lack of Zoloft or whatever.
That's definitely not it.
You don't have heartburn because you're not taking omeprazole. Yeah. And then it all creates a vicious cycle too, because PPIs, like I was saying, you need PPIs to break down your proteins into individual amino acids that then fuel neurotransmitter pathways like serotonin. So, it's
treating something that's then, well, one, you're not even treating the problem, and two, you're actually causing more problems, which then will have to be treated, which then have to be treated with something else. That's our healthcare system right there.
Yeah.
That's
It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, but at least there's people like us that can kind of backtrack. But it takes time and it takes education, because it's like, well, this is what I was recommended, and there are people that can't. Going back to the PPI thing, my own father, he's on a very, very low dose, and he doesn't even do it every day, but I can't get him off of it. And granted, like, there's some lifestyle things that he could change that he's not, but I've tried all the supplements in my back pocket that I know to help, and he still is. I'm glad he's on a very low dose and it's not daily, and that's what he always tells me, But but I feel like I haven't succeeded with that, right? And that's going to happen. And, maybe that's okay. I mean, I've tested his gut many times and he's actually looking pretty good. So I'm happy about it, but yeah. So
that's tough.
And if someone, is having raging heartburn and it's keeping them up at night, like, okay, we can come in here with a little bit of an assist if that improves your symptoms, but let's not set this up for like, this is the long-term fix.
Sure.
Because it's not, because it's going to cause more problems down the road.
More issues. Yeah. I totally agree with that. There are so many things. I'm trying to go more nutrition and dietary as much as possible. I guess we can go with that one. I like that. All right. What role does microbiome testing, so what role does gut testing play in customizing a person's nutrition plan long term? I know we've touched on it with like certain things like fiber, for instance.
Yeah.
But as like a general consensus, if someone gets a gut test, like, what are the things that you look at and how would you potentially individualize a plan?
Yeah.
Not you specifically, because I know that's not necessarily what your focus is right now. But.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I have a lot of opinions about this, of course. So I will say that there are bucket symptoms, right? Think IBS, think gas and bloating, motility, dysmotility. Those are like the biggest things we hear. Heartburn maybe, but like those are the biggest buckets. And those symptoms have way overlapping etiologies, okay? And when you test people's guts, they can have wildly different gut profiles. So, sometimes you're looking at an overgrowth picture where someone has hypochlorhydria or low stomach acid and they've got a lot of overgrowth in the gut. and they're producing all these inflammatory toxins.
Mhm.
And at that point, it's like, we need to support your digestion. We need to support your stomach acid. That's an area where I'm not using probiotics, and I'm going to calm things down. And maybe even we use things like antimicrobials, botanical, like that can assist with rebalancing the microbiome, or certain precision probiotics that can do a little bit of a better job of like simultaneous like weeding and seeding. I use the garden analogy a lot with patients because the microbiome is like a garden, right? And if you think about prepping your garden for the season, like you got to pull weeds before you plant seeds. And sometimes there's a need for that. Sometimes we see the person with the same symptom picture, gas and bloating, and their gut is just wiped out. Like they don't have good commensals. They're lacking their keystone species. They have really low immune function. And that's a person where we do need to support with fibers. Probiotics usually come into that there. We need to do some gut repair. We need to support the immune function. We need to support stress and sleep. I mean, that's a given for everyone usually. But so point being is that the same symptom picture can have wildly different gut presentations. And that is the benefit of testing. Because if you've got this one size fits all approach for every person that comes in with gas and bloating, you're not going to be successful with all of them. And that's the bread and butter, right? That's the bread and butter of what I do and why we need to do it. So I think that answered the question for the most part.
Because that's interesting. Because there is no one size fits all based off of just symptoms.
Just symptoms.
Which, I mean, the body works like that regardless.
Yeah.
But,
and people, like to think that there's a one size fits all approach. I mean,
well, that's because we want everything to make sense.
Right. Exactly.
And not everyone automatically, like us, we don't go to, well, test it.
Right.
And I'll know.
Right.
It's like, well, I have gas and I had gas when I did this. So maybe that's what's causing it. So I must need more probiotics, or I must need fiber, or my fiber's not working. So I need a soluble fiber versus a non-soluble. And like, that's the route that we go. My grandmother went through this a couple months back and I was like, I don't know. Like, I have no advice for you. She's like, well, here are all my supplements. I'm like, fantastic. Still don't know anything.
Yeah.
Like this is not helpful. I can tell you like, well, this might cause this, but I don't actually know what's going on.
Yeah. That being said, I mean, I will say that the foundational principles are oftentimes the same. Yeah. Like, get rid of the sugars.
Sure.
Get rid of the certainly processed trans fats. Right. Stress and sleep.
Right.
Eat plants. I mean, maybe that's not a foundational principle for someone who's counseling on a completely carnivore diet, but it is one of my foundational principles. Yeah. It is a Mediterranean diet principle, which again, that makes diet sense. Really does win the game when you look at it at large scale population studies. So, I mean, I do find myself counseling on the same general principles like a lot, but there is a need for different targeted gut protocols, different targeted fiber dosing, and different fibers to use, different macro percentages and things like that.
Okay. I guess we can end with this unless you have other things that you definitely want to talk about, because I'm open. Should everyone get their gut tested? And if so, how often? If not, then who is the person that needs to get their gut tested?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think you can say yes. I think I would say yes. The tests are not cheap. So if you have the money to investigate, I think it's worth doing for the most part. Definitely if you have gut symptoms, it's worth investigating because of what we just said. Like, you can have this same bucket of symptoms and it can present very differently, and your gut profiles can be different, dramatically different. And then it will save you time in the long term to do a test, work with someone who knows what they're talking about, do a more precision protocol than someone like your grandmother, who it's like, well, I'm going to buy this and that off the internet and try a few things and see. Like you're shortening that journey, right? Which I think is important for most people. Beyond gut symptoms, and this is where people struggle to conceptualize it, is my gut's fine. Why would I need that? Well, what is your ailment? And for me, the two biggest things are skin and I guess brain chemistry, stress and mood, which there's so many variables around that, and who doesn't have anxiety in 2025? I don't know. But like, That's fair. So there's a lot of reasons why someone may present with, being stressed, having anxiety, but there's also, gut dysbiosis can drive that. And there is a very profound gut skin connection. 1 in 5 kids have eczema in our country. And that's a problem. And it's life disrupting for families. And if you can shorten that journey of figuring that out for people, why not? I've worked with so many people that I talk about what I do and they're like, oh, that sounds cool. I'm not really sure. And then like a month goes by and then I get a call and they're like, you know what, I'm ready to take some action. I'm at my wit's end. Like, let's do something about this. And I'm always like, sure. Yeah, let's go. Yeah. And I'm totally fine letting people, I'm not a really salesy person. That's not my strength. So I would much rather people come to me ready for action than me force anything on them. Sure. No, I think it's definitely worthwhile, especially if there's targeted symptoms. Does a perfectly well person need this? Maybe not. But is anybody perfectly well?
I was going to say, does that exist?
I don't know. I mean, if you're happy-go-lucky and have no complaints in life, maybe not. Because I don't like chasing something that's not there.
Sure.
But at the other side of that coin, like just because this isn't a problem now doesn't mean it's not going to become a problem in the future type of thing.
Yeah. We just see a lot of people with like autoimmune diseases, right?
Well, we haven't even talked about that, but.
And we can, but we have people come in with autoimmune diseases, Hashimoto's, things like that. Some of them you'll ask, okay, well, how's your gut health? Like over time, like last 10, 20 years, how's your gut health been? A lot of them will say like, I guess I have gas and bloating like any other person, but nothing crazy. Typically those are people that or probably wouldn't come in and get a gut test now. 20 years ago, they wouldn't have got a gut test because there was nothing really wrong with their gut. Mm-hmm. However, in most cases, inflammation starting in the gut is what's potentially causing majority of these autoimmune diseases, which is why I think, exactly.
Yeah, it's funny. We've been talking for how long and we haven't mentioned autoimmune, leaky gut, or gluten once. And so maybe we should.
That is interesting. Those are some keywords.
Those are some keywords.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is gut health 10 years ago, honestly. Like when I first started getting into this is when it was all about leaky gut. I think one of your questions for me, like, what is leaky gut? Is it real? Yeah, it's real. It's definitely real. So, okay, what is leaky gut? So we have this barrier. I think one of the flaws of the human anatomy is that our digestive tract, our intestinal cells, the lining, 1 cell layer thick, 1 cell. I think we'd all be better off if that was a little bit more substantial, right? But 1 cell, and that's just your cell. And then on top of that, you have a layer of mucus. And then on top of that is where the microbiome resides. And then on the bottom of that is where your immune system happens in what's called it's called the lamina propria. It's a funky name. So that is your gut barrier. Okay. That is your gut wall, if you will. And that breaks down through inappropriate microbiome, deterioration of the mucus layer. Then you get to damage of the cells themselves. And then that talks to the immune system. And that's where you get immune system dysregulation. And that's where you get autoimmunity. So that's the mechanism. I think where people go wrong is simplifying it to just that, which is complicated enough. But, talk about like one size fits all approach. I feel like when I first got into this, it was like, oh, you have leaky gut. Oh, you have leaky gut. Let's heal your gut. That was the concept. And it's not wrong, but it's also not the whole story. I think where people go wrong is not understanding all of the things I just listed out, everything that goes into making up that healthy gut barrier. So it's not just about fixing your tight junctions. It's not just about the microbiome. It's supporting that entire environment. The mucus support is important as well. And part of the microbiome, part of those microbes do that. It all kind of interacts together. So absolutely the health of that barrier is going to drive the health of the immune system. And that's where autoimmunity happens. And autoimmunity tends to, there's a genetic component. There is definitely a genetic component to this. Autoimmune tends to run in families. And then if someone has one autoimmune disease, they're more susceptible to others. So that's a shame. But that is also a reality. It's
also not a guarantee.
It's also not a guarantee. Like, what's the phrase? Like, the gun analogy, which I hate. So genetics load the gun and lifestyle pulls the trigger. Not really a fan of that, but it does also make sense to people. So the other sort of analogy I give about leaky gut is a brick wall, right? And this oversimplifies it, like, whoa. But, if you think of a brick wall and bricks are held together by mortar, a leaky gut is kind of like a brick wall where the mortar is disintegrated, right? So it's like you lose that substantial barrier that is your brick wall. People jive with that. I think they resonate with that, I should say. So, genetics play into it. Diet plays into it. This is a big area where the gluten conversation comes in. So I have a lot of, I could talk about gluten all day long, really. This is kind of where I got into this space. And I have a lot of experience in like the celiac space. I'm not celiac myself, but I'm a person who's very sensitive to gluten. And getting rid of it has really changed my life for the better for a lot of reasons. But gluten is one of the things that has been identified to drive leaky gut, especially in terms of the protein zonulin. Gluten can bind to zonulin, and zonulin is kind of like that main protein in the mortar of the brick wall. And then, of course, celiac disease is a manifestation of gluten autoimmunity. And then there's tons of comorbidities with celiac and other autoimmunity. So I'm a little bit in the camp of, if you have an autoimmune disease, you're probably doing yourself a favor by getting gluten out of your diet. And I do sort of make that blanket statement. As much as I don't like being food police and banishing foods, that is a principle that I teach and follow and encourage. It's also a very, gluten is the Latin word for glue. And
which should say it all.
Which should say it all, right? Right. Like, so it acts that way inside your digestive tract, and it's very constipating. So, anyone suffering from that ailment would likely benefit from removing it. That said, like, celiac often manifests as like a diarrheal presentation. Celiac is really underscreened for. And I don't know why. Yeah. And I don't really know why, because it's a blood. I mean, I think there's confusion that you got to get an invasive biopsy to be screened for celiac. You really don't. It's a blood antibody test that has pretty decent specificity, and I trust that. I don't see the harm in getting that for almost everyone. The other thing is that celiac can manifest, you can be living a happy, healthy life and then get celiac in your 80s. That can happen.
Really?
So getting it tested once really doesn't do it. If things change, of course you can get diagnosed in your, when you're 2 years old, Antibody testing is a little unreliable before the age of 2, just because of the immune system maturity and things like that. But yeah, so the celiac piece is a big deal. Stool testing does not test for celiac. That is one limitation to it, and it's actually almost a little bit of a disservice because a lot of stool tests do have like a gluten antibody for gluten sensitivity.
Sure.
And I think people misunderstand that. Yeah. And so, that might come back negative, but that doesn't mean you've been tested for celiac. Right. So that's delicate. And so I would encourage people, again, to work with someone who knows what they're talking about. You don't need to be a GI doctor to run a celiac test. I think technically you do need to be a physician to diagnose it. And that's where being a dietitian is kind of limited. Like I can run all the labs you want all day, every day, but like I'm not the one who's officially allowed to give you that diagnosis. Right. But yeah, celiac's a big deal. If you're having symptoms, I feel like if there's any mystery symptom out there, because it can present in the skin, it can present in the brain. Gluten ataxia is a real thing. Dermatitis herpetiformis is a real thing. If you're having any mystery ailment and you haven't been screened for celiac, ask your doctor for it. Ask whoever you're working with, nutrition professional or practitioner in this space. Ask for it. You can get a celiac test for like, I don't know, a couple $100. Like a blood trial is going to cost some money. Like it's just the way it is, but it's worth it. And going back to the whole thing about reflux and GERD and PPIs, I have seen celiac present the only symptom as reflux. So instead of putting that person on a PPI, let's test them for celiac and see what this could be. So, so that's something that's very, very under recognized, under tested for, under diagnosed.
Which is super odd because I've talked to so many people that are like gluten intolerant, or they say like, well, I'm borderline celiac, which they don't actually know that, but they claim that. And it seems like that's a common theme nowadays. So you'd think most people, or there'd be a lot more people getting screened, but it's probably the people that are gluten intolerant or whatever they claim are the ones getting screened while the symptoms are not being presented in the way that those people are seeing symptoms with gluten intolerance. Is that right?
Yeah.
So it'd be the people that are like having skin issues or having other symptoms presented that they're trying to go to a dermatologist and get that treated through them, whereas they should actually be screened for celiac.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The one thing I will say is it's hard to test accurately if you've already eliminated it. So antibody testing is exposure based, and that goes for celiac, that goes for like general food sensitivity testing as well. So for these people that are like, I know I'm sensitive to gluten, I avoid it, someone like myself would not pop positive on a celiac. I've been tested before I was gluten free, and that's actually another area where you can test genetics. I have negative genetics. Having the genetics doesn't diagnose you celiac, but you have a genetic potential if you have them. So that's something like families can test if there's curiosity in that area. But I don't over rely on genetic testing. But like I have a friend right now whose kid is low stature, so he's been worked up and they've been to GI, and he had a negative antibody test. And I think they're trying to get him to do a biopsy. And I'm kind of like, this looks negative to me. Yeah. I was like, why didn't they do the genetics? Because a negative antibody plus negative genetics would be like, this is negative, game over, you can move on. Yeah. That being said, your kid could still have an issue with gluten and not be celiac. But these are the things that I have conversations about at dinner parties, because this is what I do for a living. And it's very confusing to people, right? Yeah. So, But yeah, those are conversations that need to be had. And I cannot tell you how many times it's like, this person has had a complete GI workup that didn't include a screen for celiac. Like, what's that about? That's not complete.
Yeah. That's frustrating. That needs to be figured out.
Yeah.